For those who don't know me, I come from a family of co-operators starting in 1932 with my grandfather, who works for the London Co-operative Society. I worked for the Co-operative Group for 15 years. I'm elected to their National Members Council, and I'm a trustee for the UK Society for Co-operative Studies. I'm hugely honoured to have been elected to the National Executive Committee from Scotland and Northern Ireland and to be Vice Chair. I'm here today to introduce an amazing woman and fellow co-operator, Anneliese Dodds. Anneliese is the Shadow Chancellor, the first woman to hold this position, and is Labour and Co-operative MP for Oxford East. Before her election to Parliament, she was the MEP for South East England and a lecturer in public policy for King's College London and Aston University. Welcome, Anneliese.
Thank you very much indeed, Ruth. It's so good to be at least virtually with you all. A real privilege for me and an honour, because I am, as Ruth mentioned, a Labour and cooperative MP. And I think as we face these days, which are very, very difficult ones for so many of us and so many of our communities, we're really seeing that value of cooperation being underlined, cooperation in practice. We saw how within just days, weeks of this crisis starting, how people came together. They came together to cooperate. Friends, families, local communities creating mutual aid groups right across the country, a vast network of people looking out for each other, from dropping off vital supplies of food and medicine to those who really needed it, to picking up the phone to talk to people who've been facing this crisis on their own. And I'm speaking to you now from Oxford, and in my city, those networks of cooperation have persisted, and in fact we're having to revitalise them now as we potentially move into higher levels of infection again. And of course we've also seen during this crisis that value of public service being underlined as well. Those services that we've depended on in many cases more than ever before, being so critical to our communities. And at the heart of all of this has been that value of cooperation, of mutuality, and indeed respect and care for one another. Now, of course, despite that tremendous community-driven effort, our country is struggling very severely right now, as Ciara's been describing. We've had the worst excess death rate in Europe, the deepest recession in the G7, and still, even now, a test, trace and isolate system that isn't functioning. Of course, infections rising, government ministers who can't remember their own rules, let alone communicate them to others, and indeed the British public being blamed for problems with this virus rather than central government getting a grip on the circumstances that we're facing. Now, as the party of opposition at a time of national crisis, just as Ciara was outlining, we have sought to be constructive. We've highlighted where the government is getting its decisions and delivery wrong, but we haven't shied away from admitting where they've got it right. But we've been clear how Labour would have faced up to this crisis far more effectively and provided solutions to the challenges that we face. We've got to fix, test, trace and isolate by empowering local public health services to take control. That's what's happening in Labour-run Wales, which is far more effective. We need it to happen everywhere. We need to make public health messages clear and consistent with openness around core decisions like adding additional restrictions, just as the Welsh Government, again, has demonstrated Labour in power delivering for people's health. And of course, we need to have a determination to tackle our country's jobs crisis, not turn away from it. And I've outlined 3 steps that government should be taking to secure a better, safer future for our economy and our country, to recover jobs, to retrain workers and rebuild business. First, we've got to recover jobs. Government has got to junk its insinuation that businesses that are struggling right now are necessarily unviable. In areas from the arts to manufacturing, those businesses need a temporary helping hand, but they're being left to sink or swim. Yesterday, we saw a partial acknowledgement of this with the government's changes to the job support scheme for businesses that have been closed for public health reasons. But we really need broader changes to that job support scheme. If we look at other countries that operate wage support, their businesses are incentivized to keep staff on part-time rather than just keeping some on and making the rest redundant. And that scheme needs to include a training element so workers can use their non-working time to develop their skills and prepare for the future. It should be targeted so those sectors that are hardest hit by the virus and which will be critical to our economic recovery are supported, not just those which have been closed. This virus is having a much broader impact. And we shouldn't have public money provided as a blank check. The scheme should be open for those workers who promise they will treat their workers decently and meet net zero obligations, the kinds of principles that cooperative businesses tend to demonstrate as a matter of course. Failing to reform that job support scheme indicates a sink or swim mentality, but we're in the middle of a pandemic that's affecting us collectively, where some businesses are having to close for the good of us all. And now we also need to ensure, as I said, that workers who've already lost their jobs receive the training that they need. We've called on government to come forward with a national retraining strategy, bringing forward spending so that it gets out to communities now. The vast majority of what government has announced on training will not be kicking in until next April, but people need that support right now. People need help, they need hope, they need to enable themselves to prepare for the future. That response has fallen far short of what's needed. Overall, all government measures taken together to support those people who've become unemployed will just be helping 1 in 5 of those the government itself expects will be out of work by the end of this year. Again, a sink or swim mentality that is letting people down. Now, the third step of Labour's approach, as I said, is to rebuild business. We need to look ahead. We need to look ahead to when loan repayments start falling due, but our economy won't be back to full strength. And in fact, for many businesses, although it will be possible now, after Labour's calls for them to defer some of their loan repayments, they'll still be saddled with enormous debt. And at the very time when they will need to be investing. So we need to start planning right now to tackle that problem. That means engaging with the kind of imaginative thinking the cooperative movement is so renowned for, so we can encourage and ensure that businesses will start to invest again. And of course, we need to provide confidence in the future of the UK economy. That means matching the ambitions for green investment of countries like France and Germany, not shutting our country out of the race for the jobs of the future. So far, we've seen extremely limited ambitions from the Conservative government, whether we're talking about retrofitting, just a third of what they even promised at the last general election, whether we're talking about green energy, where we're still not seeing radical action being taken around the technologies of the future, or whether it's around supporting the circular economy or green transport. There's far too little, it's coming too late. That must change. And government, of course, itself needs to show it's committed to that change. As I said in my conference speech, no more should we see public spending being devoted to outcomes that will make the shift to net zero harder rather than easier. Now, of course, rebuilding business means more than just getting to the other side of this crisis. It means thinking about what kind of economy we want in the long run, the kind of country we want to be, the kind of government we want running our country, and the kind of businesses we want operating within our borders. It seems to me in recent years, the Conservative government has come to expect less and less of business. And in turn, business has come to expect less and less of the government, a government that's trashed our global reputation by threatening to break international law, putting our prosperity at risk. A government that all too often turns a blind eye to corporate malpractice and falsely claims a belief in free enterprise as the rationale. A government that insists we've got to accept that state of affairs as being just the way of the world. But I don't believe that. I know there are purposeful, responsible businesses out there looking for government to lead. I know that because so many of those businesses are in the cooperative and mutual sector. I've visited a large number of them since I became Shadow Chancellor, from a bike cooperative in Edinburgh to a social enterprise in Peckham. There are so many wonderful examples of the economy of the future out there already, but they're not getting the backing that they deserve. We've got to lead the way in showing what can happen when workers are given a real stake in the company they work for and can take pride in being part of a bigger vision. That principle of cooperation has got to be at the heart of our economic recovery. And it's not just a nice to have. A thriving cooperative sector can be a driver of post-crisis economic growth and, crucially, ensure we recover in a fairer, more equitable way. Look at parts of Italy where cooperative enterprise generates 40% of their region's GDP, and at the same time ensure that there are very low levels of socioeconomic inequality. People in the UK are ready for that change. And as the Cooperative Party's research has shown, just 10% of our population believe that our economy prioritises sharing wealth fairly. That was before this crisis. But now 2/3 of people want the sharing of wealth to be a priority in what comes next. And that's not a surprise. Already as we entered lockdown, the UK was one of the most unequal countries in Europe. Productivity was flatlining. Wages have been stagnant since the time of the global financial crisis. A quarter of our families had less than £100 in savings. The enormous promise of credit unions and mutuals to provide financial stability has been woefully underused. At both the individual and the national level, after 10 years of Conservative rule, we lacked resilience. No wonder COVID-19 has only exacerbated those trends. Even more precarious work, with the number of zero-hour contracts rising by 156,000 over the last year, often in frontline roles in health, social care and retail. Even more insecurity, with 174,000 tenants threatened with eviction due to arrears built up during this crisis. And even poorer household finances, with 6 million people falling behind on rent, council tax and other household bills between March and July. As we rebuild our economy from this crisis, we must focus on tackling those problems and building up resilience so they never arise again. And we can do that. We can do that by broadening ownership and giving more people a stake in our economy. We can do it by boosting productivity and embedding long-term thinking in boardrooms. We can do it by ensuring transparency and accountability. All of these are hallmarks of cooperative businesses, which is why a flourishing cooperative sector is critical to our recovery. I want to see the cooperative sector we already have protected and supported through this crisis, and I want to see it grow as we emerge on the other side, so it forms a much greater part of our economy of tomorrow. I want your help in setting out how we do that. You are all the experts here, people like Ruth, others on this call, and I want to hear from you. Where are the existential risks of the cooperative sector right now, and what can be done to help? Where are the opportunities for cooperative growth going to come from, and what can be done to realise them? As a Cooperative Shadow Chancellor, I want to work with you to determine how we build a better, more secure and more resilient future. How, as well as recovering jobs and retraining workers, we can rebuild business in this country by embedding our cooperative and mutual values. I look forward to us working together, to us cooperating. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Anneliese. It's the only problem with us not being in person. It's just sort of, you don't get the round of applause, just the awkward silence at the end. But that was brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm going to jump straight into questions that people have been putting in, if that's all right. So from Mary, with local lockdowns in some parts of the country, do we risk growing the north-south divide? What's a cooperative answer to tackling regional inequality?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, Mary. And unfortunately, I don't think we just risk a future with greater inequality. We're already seeing it. And we already know that many areas of the UK have been under additional restrictions for a very long time now. Leicester's already passed 100 days under additional restrictions. 1 in 4 people in our country are affected by them. And yet, sadly, our government seems only to have woken up to that reality over the last day, where we've had an announcement of some additional support. Now, I think that will go some way to helping some of the businesses that are impacted, but much more needs to be done. In the short term, we need to make sure that the much broader flaws with that job support scheme are sorted out, because yes, there's now some change for workers in directly closed businesses, but there are many other businesses which are also impacted, but which haven't been forced to close. We need to make sure that that support goes in step with the imposition of public health restrictions. And we need to end a situation where some areas get some help per capita and others get literally nothing. That's got to change. That needs to happen in the short term. But of course, in the longer term, we've got to really grapple with those problems that have caused that regional inequality. And sadly, we may have some rhetoric coming from the Conservative government around this. We just don't have the delivery. They talk about different investment programs, they talk about different infrastructure going in, but they've not been willing to apply conditions to ensure that that will actually result in local jobs, in local upskilling, in a better local environment, in better local quality of life in different areas. It's all very well a Conservative politician having a picture with a hard hat on their head next to a shiny new railway station, but if people can't afford to use it, if it's not what people need, and if it's not being built by local workers with local firms, that's not going to be transformative for those areas that need support. So a huge amount to be done, and I view cooperatives, mutuals, as really core to that change. So often we see cooperatives moving into those areas that have been subject to really severe economic stress. They're the first to move in, and they're often the only businesses and the only organisations that persist because of their strength, because of the way that they're organised. So government needs to do much more, but obviously we will push them as Labour to ensure that action is taken, so their role in that regeneration, in that future for dealing with inequality is properly recognised.
Fabulous, thank you. This one is from an Anonymous. So cooperatives are committed to the fair tax mark. And so if you get elected in 2024, I'm guessing this is to government, how will you ensure big corporations pay appropriate tax for the revenue they generate in the UK?
Well, that's a huge question. I mean, I would start off by paying tribute to the work that those involved with the fair tax mark have engaged in, and the cooperative movement has been absolutely critical to that, and the Cooperative Party. There's a huge amount that needs to change. I mean, where to start around this? I would say with all of these measures, none of them are rocket science. They can all be done. We need to have country by country reporting so that we know where economic activity is, where taxes are paid, so that tax authorities can actually take action. We need to have an end to those sweetheart deals that are concluded behind closed doors, which mean that often very, very major firms end up paying less tax than others would be paying because they've had that kind of a sweetheart deal. We need to work with other countries around this. We need to do that really quickly, because so often we find that multinational companies will be looking to play different countries off against each other. We need to engage in that really quickly. And we need to face up to the big unfairnesses in our tax system. The fact that businesses based on clicks pay so much less tax a lot of the time than businesses based on bricks, that are the ones that are so core to our high streets and our local economies right across the country. So a lot to be done. I think we can do it. And certainly I'm committed to that. I know the Labour Party is, and the Cooperative Party as well.
Fabulous. This one is from Jamie. The Co-operative Party has done great work in writing a plan for a co-op Green New Deal. How do you intend to make this plan a reality?
Well, I agree. It's been absolutely brilliant work, and we're looking very closely at the work that the Cooperative Party has undertaken, as well as a whole range of other bodies, in setting out how we can have that properly green, environmentally friendly and job-rich recovery that we need so desperately to see. Now, I've been working with the Shadow Business Secretary, Ed Miliband. We've had a green recovery consultation. We've had responses into that. I'm really grateful to those taking part in this conference who did provide responses. It was absolutely brilliant. We're going through all of that now. We're going to have a launch of the report coming out of that. And I think people will see so many of those wonderful ideas reflected in that report. And I would just underline, this isn't just important for our environment. It's not just important for jobs. It's really, really important for our economy for the future. We see right now businesses looking at the UK, how little investment and support there is, for example, for hydrogen, one of those technologies of the future. They're comparing that to what is occurring in countries like Germany and France. And sadly, they're voting with their feet. They're pulling jobs out of our country. We can't accept that any longer. This makes economic sense as well as environmental sense, and sense for those who will be able to make use of those jobs of the future.
So this one, we don't have a name. High streets are struggling. How can communities and co-ops form part of the solution? And what does the government need to do to support our town centres survive?
Well, I think that's a really important question. I would say there are two elements to this. First of all, we've actually seen an underspend on some of the money that central government provided to local authorities to help them to support local businesses. Now, it's absolutely ridiculous that local authorities can't now use that money. So we've called on central government, saying to them, look, you need to actually open up that fund again, that underspend. Now, I think it's about 1.2 billion, I believe, that needs to be available to those businesses that are really struggling on our high streets. We've called it High Streets Fight Back Fund. But we also need to ensure that in the future, local authorities actually have the ability to make sure that our high streets stay as places where people want to go to shop, they want to go to work, and they want to live. With the new planning measures that government's putting forward, we could see really radical changes to our high streets, possibly a lot of really poor quality accommodation going into different places, pricing businesses out, often cooperative businesses, out of our high streets. That system will mean we don't have those great mixed communities, those fantastic local economies that people want to go into. This is really pulling the rug away from the control that communities can have over their high streets, and government really needs to look again. Even some of their own Conservative MPs are calling on them to look again. They really need to right now.
Fantastic, absolutely amazing having you with us, Anneliese. Thank you everyone for your questions. Having the first female Shadow Chancellor be a Labour and Cooperative, we're very proud. So yeah, thank you for joining us at the conference. Thank you. Our next panel is going to be chaired by Hugh Iranka Davies, who's the Labour and Cooperative Member of Senate for Ogmore. Thank you very much, everyone.